Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us again for this second part of the three-part mini-series. I'm once again joined by Bill Franks, Chief Analytics Officer at the IAA, who will be sharing his thoughts this time around on the second roundtable track at the upcoming Data and Analytics Insights Summit, where Bill is one of our keynote speakers. The track number 2 is governing and managing increasingly accessible data. So as I'm sure many of our watchers have experienced, the growing amount of collected data is increasingly being distributed and touched by so many different entities within your organization, and the need to enact effective data governance and data management strategies to protect the integrity of this data is becoming more and more pressing. Bill, do you agree with that statement? And if so, what are your sort of experiences of how this challenge has developed within the space?
Yeah, this is one of these challenges that to an outsider, you'd think it would have been a resolved challenge in the sense that it's been important for decades. But why is it still coming up? In fact, not only coming up, but being raised more and more urgently. And I think it's because organizations haven't necessarily done a great job of governing this information. And we're combining with that more and more information that needs governed, as well as a whole lot more regulations and policies that are coming into play that have pretty serious financial implications. For example, if you have a violation of the GDPR protocols over in Europe. So I think the thing that makes this so hard is you really have a balance between two equally important but actually in conflict things, which is the access and usability of the data for the people who need to be making use of that data, but then the enforcement of proper usage and policies around that. And so obviously the more that you lean a little bit and balance the scale towards the user, the more risk you add of data getting misused. But you lean too far the other way and tighten things up too much and nothing can get done. And so it's almost that constant push and pull where in some cases, organizations have gone a little too far towards looseness. In other cases, they've gone a little too far towards tightness. And frankly, I'm not convinced there's a single right answer in this, even within an organization. I think the answer can depend on the type of application and usage of data that you're doing. I think it can depend on the latest state of the rules and regulations. So it's a moving target as well. I don't think you ever have a governance strategy locked down. I think you have today's version of the governance strategy and how you've implemented it, but that it's going to be changing on an ongoing basis. And that's what I think people struggle with at big organizations, is that constant change and push and pull together.
Yeah, and what are the key things then that data and analytics leaders need to consider when they are trying to remain agile enough to satisfy the needs of the business?
So a couple things. One that I think most people do a decent job of is accounting for the user type. So a very sophisticated data scientist type of resource, they should have and are able to handle a much more liberal policy of giving them access to data in a raw format, allowing them to do things with data on an experimental basis that maybe you typically wouldn't allow people to do because they're more trusted. On the other hand, a lot of the standard report users, you got to keep them locked down. So I think accounting for the user type. I think another key thing is what's the risk you have with a given piece of data or a given use of data. So to give you two examples there, obviously, if you're just analyzing some clickstream data from a website, there's a little less risk to the organization than if you're dealing with something like healthcare data, obviously. So you're going to have to account for that. I think the other thing is the usage of it. So even within the use of healthcare data, some usages might be fairly innocuous, like just trying to look for, is there a trend of increased flu or COVID cases from our medical records, versus something like trying to predict who's likely to develop a certain type of cancer or other medical issues. So I think it's that combination of how sensitive is the data inherently, and then how sensitive is this use. You have to account for both of those. And one of the prime ways to do that is not just through permissioning, but even having different views of the data or different data sets that are kind of curated for specific uses for specific user groups and problems. That can really help manage it. That way the end users aren't having to worry about the governance directly because they're already being given something that's been properly governed, and it's that at the point of the data provisions that the governance is enforced. And that I think lowers a lot of risk and complexity, because you don't want everybody thinking about it as much as you want the core people responsible for it thinking about it, making sure it's being done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And thinking of a specific aspect of data management in general, so thinking about data quality, I think that everyone can agree that this is an ongoing, continual challenge within the space, especially when trying to advance AI, and that is what our next episode is all about. But why is this such a continual challenge, and do you see any end in sight there?
Well, I think it's one of these, it is frustrating at first, and a lot of people complain about it, but what I always like to point out is that the data quality issues you're struggling with today, I almost guarantee you, unless your organization is a complete disaster right now, they're completely different data quality issues than you had a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago. So as you start to ingest and make use of new data and or you're using existing data in new ways, you're going to find issues with it. That's just a given. And so it's really a function of, if you were to go back, to prior to the big data era, a lot of companies had some decent quality. They would have rated it pretty high quality in many cases because they had a limited set of data they'd been using for a number of years, and they had it pretty much under control. Well, all sorts of new data started coming at them. And of course, when you haven't touched it before, you're going to have to clean it up. You're going to find the, didn't think about that. So I think it's not as much doom and gloom as people tend to interpret it. I think if you're successfully pursuing and integrating new data sources, you will by definition have data quality, but that's a good problem to have because it means you're pushing the envelope of both the collection and usage of data. So I think that's the perspective I'd have people take. Now, if you find you're still struggling with your same data 2 years from now with the same data quality issues on that data, now that's a problem. That just means somehow you're not effectively identifying and implementing changes that will fix it. But the vast majority of cases, if you really dig into it, yes, data quality is always a problem, but it's always a different problem as you solve one, others pop up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bill, for your thoughts on that. That sort of wraps up our second episode. Everyone make sure that you do tune in for our third and final part of the mini-series, which will be focusing on advancing, trusting and scaling AI. Thank you so much, Bill. See you at the next episode.